Hi folks, we're Tasteless today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of what makes a citizen, why is a citizen loyal and dutiful, part of the social contract, part of the civis, meets its obligations and duties and commitments and so on. What makes such a citizen, a loyal citizen? Now we can look at sort of different types of countries. If you look at sort of the new countries like, say, the United States or Australia, where there isn't the long, domicile tradition of people living in the same village for thousands of years and all that sort of thing. There are new people arriving with a very pioneering spirit. They're out to build something new and create something and so on. And people who share that vision may not necessarily all come from the same village or the same town or country. They could come from different places, but they are joined, if you will, in the civis by, again, their pioneering spirit, their commitment to build something new, and their commitment also to leave the past behind. They may be escaping, religious persecution or whatever. It doesn't matter. But they say, no, that was yesterday. I'm now a new citizen of a new land, and I'm going to build and help build this new land, which is and just there's nothing here. We're building it from scratch, and there were no buildings and no roads and no infrastructure or anything in the United, or a little bit, I guess, in the United States, but hardly any. And in Australia and New Zealand and so on, there was nothing there. So the idea that the new people arriving, again, they could come from different places, but they would share that vision and that spirit, and were still, for example, they would all have been Christians. So they had a subset connection there in Christianity. They believed in Jesus and the same God and the same scriptures and so on. Now, they may have gone about this ceremonially. They may have been different. They may have, one side may have eaten rice paper and the other not, but they still had that Christian tradition to bind them. And that those sort of things, how many pieces of the commitment do you need before you get a cohesive society or build a cohesive society? And that's really what I want to explore, I guess, in this essay. Now, with countries of long tradition, Western Europe and so on, social inclusion and cohesion and social cohesion there have to be handled very differently if they're to be successful, because there's already a very long-term established traditions and so on in that country, behaviors, customs, habits, beliefs, views, how people interact, how the laws, because the laws sort of happen pretty much organically around the local people and their behavior and their attitudes and views and their loyalties and so on. So when people come from outside with very different religions, very different social habits, attitudes, views, behaviors, then if they come in small numbers, they have no option but to integrate. But when their numbers are large, then they have a lot of problems integrating, and they may never integrate. And this is what's happening at the moment in the first world traditional nations, is as these large numbers of people come in, from the Indian subcontinent and so on and so forth, Africa, they're just simply not integrating. They're creating ghettos, and they're living the same social lives that they would have lived in Africa or India or Pakistan or Bangladesh, and they're not adjusting or the micro levels of adjustment. And even if they go to school, the children that go to school in the West or in England, say we'll use England as the baseline here, the people still say, well, what are you? I'm Indian. And then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 generations along of being locally born, you ask them, I'm Indian. And the idea that they would be considered, unless it's claiming benefits, where then they become English. But outside of that, no, I'm Indian. And And this is creating a bit of an issue here. How do you integrate these people, and how far back do you go in terms of being locally born before you become, and again, using England as the baseline, before you become English? Now, and then does this guarantee loyalty? I mean, take David Cameron and Theresa May and Tony Blair. They aggressively sold out the British state and the British public, and the British aggressively sold them out to the globalists. Yet they were all long-term, white British people with long-term roots in the country, going back many generations of being locally born. So that's no guarantee of anything. And if you look at many of the other politicians in Britain, Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner and Rachel Reeves, the current crop of useless morons, they're again aggressively selling out Britain and the society and the British public and the British citizenry. So being white or being straight or being belong to, that's no guarantee. There's plenty of white people that are gagging to sell out Britain, whether it be for money or fame or a bit of both or whatever. Look at that Rory Stewart guy. Look how keen he is to sell Britain, and he was on the globalist payroll through US aid. So just for a bit of money and a decent quality of life and cash to splash, he was more than prepared to sell out Britain to the globalist cabal. So that's not the issue here. The likelihood of people coming in from other countries of being loyal to Britain, and it's on, that's even less likely again. So they're here in Australia or elsewhere to take what they can take. Now, in the early days of the American sort of nation state, it was mostly British people anyway. Some residue Dutch in New York, and some Germans had come along. Russians coming later, and quite a mixture. But again, they were pretty much all white, pretty much all Christian, and were very much prepared to leave the past, or a lot of it, behind. Not that there wasn't like a little Italy in New York, or a little Jewish quarter, or a little whatever. That still happened, but they fanned out pretty quickly from there and became Americans, and that was a huge success story, I thought, whether it be Irish or whatever. Wherever they did gather in communities and stay close, they typically didn't do that well. Like Tammany Hall, for example, the Irish thing in New York, that they had a reasonable amount of political power and clout. A lot of it quite corrupt, but they didn't realise economic power to the same extent, whereas the Italians had less political power, but they did acquire more economic power, starting up businesses and things like that, restaurants or whatever. And if you look at even in the 1920s, or even earlier than that, and certainly into the later 1940s, you look at the best restaurants in New York. Italian restaurants featured very prominently in the New York guides for cuisine back in the day, suggesting that they had done very well, certainly in that side of business, and some Italians had become quite wealthy out of that. Now, there was during the Italian wars of unification, there were quite a few Italians, well, not a lot, but quite a few Italians that went to Britain, for example. That was the big ice cream sort of thing that happened, and there were songs about it. Antonio, the ice cream guy with his ice cream cart, and he had his girlfriends all around and this sort of stuff. But their numbers were small, and they integrated quite quickly. Getting into ice cream making, things like that, and hairdressing and so on, and they integrated quite quickly because the numbers were quite small. And so a few thousand Italians here, a few thousand Russians there, or Poles, or this or that, and they integrated quite quickly. And you couldn't really tell them apart. They were all Christians, they were all white, and they would take local wives and husbands, and they integrated very quickly. So integration and loyalty we can sort of view as two separate things. Again, Theresa May, David Cameron, Tony Blair, they aggressively sold out their fellow citizens to the globalists. So being locally born and having long-standing heritage doesn't guarantee. It's more likely to guarantee loyalty to the nation and its citizens, but that's all. And all of these people were a different class that would sneer at the upper class people that would sneer at the low class yobs as being beyond redemption and this sort of thing. So what's and again, separating the idea of the new land like the United States when it kicked off, or the new colonial lands, Australia and so on, from the more traditional ones. And I think they need to be viewed very differently. Again, still not so much today, that's not true, but I remember certainly as a kid, the English people arriving in Australia. It was a new opportunity, a new chance, a new place. It was a new life, and they wanted to seize with both hands. But if the children came to us, this is from England or Britain, came to Australia at, say, younger than 10 years old, they would be Australian. They would become fully Australian within their lifetime. That people that arrived, and by the next generation, when their parents had died off, they would all be Australian. So it was, the first generation to, even if they weren't Australian born, they would become Australian. It would, and even the same with things like Germans, Western white Europeans, Swedes or whatever. You didn't see that many Swedes, but certainly Germans. You would see that again, provided the kids arrived early enough, and the parents learned English, that was important, because if the children were bilingual, they only could communicate to their parents in German because their parents' English was so bad. Then that would take probably 2 generations to integrate. But again, all Christian, all white. It was, behaviours and attitudes to interaction and law and so on were very similar. So, human relations, gender relations, they're all quite similar. So they were able to fit in quite quickly. If it was the case of, say, rural Italians and rural Greeks that had lived for generations in farms in rural areas, they were pretty much illiterate in their own language. So it takes them longer, 3 to even 4 generations for those people to fully integrate. Now, what's the sign of integration? Integration is that you marry outside of your own racial diaspora and procreate outside of your own racial diaspora. And if someone asks you, what nationality are you? You say, well, I'm Australian. Whereas, I know Greek people whose grandparents came to Australia as teenagers, and and they say, well, I asked them where they're from. Oh, I'm Greek. Well, hold on. Your parents were born in Australia. You were born in Australia, and you're saying you're Greek. So again, rural peasant workers with long traditions, they bring those traditions with them. They can't let them go. Or not easily, and it takes time to sort of bleed that out of the system. Looking at Australia, anyone could become Prime Minister of Australia, for example, assuming they're a citizen, but they can be a naturalised citizen. Now, there have been 2 Prime Ministers recently, both of them born in England, and it came to Australia at a young age and became naturalised citizens, and both became Prime Ministers. Now, one was very much part of the globalist cabal, very much part of the globalist cabal, the other not. Now, the globalist cabal Prime Minister was voted out of office, whereas the other British-born Prime Minister, he was, lukewarm about the globalist project. He was very concerned about how the globalist project was increasing the cost of living for the citizens. He didn't like that. He didn't like the Green New Deal imposing greater costs on the citizenry, and he wanted to do other things like plant more trees or, that sort of stuff. and he was a fairly reluctant globalist, and he did just enough to sort of keep them off his back, but wasn't right on board with the globalist project. And so they and this just shows the power of the globalists. They just went to his fellow parliamentarians, and remember, he's an elected prime minister. They went to his fellow parliamentarians, and in the same way as they took Liz Truss out back and shot her, they did the same thing to this guy. Just threw him overboard and replaced him with a super pro globalist guy, a former big bank financier who was mad keen on globalization and mass migration and so on. So they just got rid of him. Nah, you're not doing what we want. You're out. But the people voted for me. Don't give a fuck. You're out of here, buddy. So, but these were two English people. Now, one was again very pro-globalist, and the other was very reluctant globalist, who really did believe he had a commitment to the people and to the society and to their well-being and to bettering their lives and that sort of thing. So it's not impossible to have, but Australia's a new land in that sense, or newer anyway, and doesn't have that long-standing traditions that a France or a Germany or a Britain would have, or an England would have. So you can look at it slightly differently on that basis. But the sort of people arriving in Australia now, or the mass migration crowd, they're not coming to a new land to start a new life, to begin again, to leave the old world behind, and to pioneering spirit. Everything's already built here. Straight white males have built everything. And the people that are coming in are now just parasites. They just want to gimme, take, freebie. They're not here to build anything. Now, you may find the odd one or two, sure, but no, 99.99% of them are not. They're just coming as freeloaders, and they're coming in large enough numbers to create ghettos. And there are entire suburbs of Sydney and other cities in Australia that are nothing but Indian. When you go into the shop, you will only see Indians. There's almost no white people at all, and these Indians aren't bringing businesses with them or entrepreneurial spirit or this or that. They're just taking over and buying up things already here, or again just freeloading and using affirmative action and DEI, stupid policies to get jobs gifted to them so they can parasite along in the public service. And Indians that are 5 or 6 generations Western born, they still know I'm Indian, and that's their view. And they're not integrating. They don't want to integrate. Don't see why they should. Now, they're increasingly becoming more and more prominent in politics and in business and so on. And they are very much committed to furthering the interests of their family, their relatives, then their village, then the tribe, and then people of their racial diaspora. Last on their list are the white people. And so we're increasingly reaching a position where white people will be the discarded trash of the entire Western world, in the same way that white people are being treated like shit in South Africa. Now, we can only hope that the arrival of President Trump can bring some sanity back to the Western world, but already the globalists are doing everything they can to defeat him, undermine him, and subvert his policies, and their hysterical, literally Hitler messaging is a huge indicator of that. But this is where we're at. So I don't think long-standing, generational, going back several generations, really does guarantee loyalty. As again, the David Camerons and the Tony Blairs were all too eager to sell out the British. I think it has to. It's more than that. It's people who are genuinely committed. Now, in terms of rebuilding the West, I remember the politicians when I was a kid and looking back earlier. Now, forever, whether you think they weren't that bright or you think they were, intellectually a bit how you doing, or they didn't have a gender studies degree or something like that, they were very committed to their society and their people and to their country, and to improving the lives of the people. And that's something that you don't see, you rarely, if ever, see in politicians today. I mean, how many politicians in Britain could you say, in the federal government of Britain, could you say were actually concerned about the well-being of the citizenry? and to improve their lives and to lower the cost of living. I mean, are any politicians talking about that? You'd be lucky if you even got half a dozen out of the 650 or so politicians in Britain. You'd be lucky. You're lucky if you got half a dozen that would think that way. So that's where we need to start rebuilding the West, is politicians that are patriots, politicians that are they're there to represent the citizenry. Now, if you can find any politician, again, other than a handful, any politician in Britain that's there to represent the citizenry, you'll knock me over with a feather, because I don't see any of them, or hardly any of them are. And this is the stunning thing. These are the representatives of the people that hate the people, that think they don't represent the people. They just say, hey, we work for the globalist cabal. We do what they tell us, and they are our masters. Now, going back to the idea of a politician representing the people and representing the local area and representing the constituents where they're elected, this sort of thing, we need to go back to those basics. So the party machinery has taken over that role, so that they just allocate, globalist flunky stooges, gobblers, and so we'll just parachute that flunky stooge into this area or that area, and control control the entire membership of the political party through that way. And that's where the globalists began their control, going through the party machinery, Democrat party machinery and so on, which is how they were able to achieve this uni-party outcome. But we need, I believe, to go back to, if you're not prepared to represent the people and to better their lives and commit clearly to that, then you can't stand for parliament, you can't stand for political office. And you represent the people, not your diaspora. You don't represent the globalists. You don't represent, the bankers. You represent the people that vote for you, all of the people. And the best way you can show your support for the people that vote for you is by improving their lives. That's how you do it. And we need to get back to the basics of political representation. You've been a Tasselist today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.